Hello, welcome to this video on forest ecology. This is on a forest in Randolph County, Missouri. I shared a video on YouTube earlier about hydrology, and it was the same video that I'm going to show here because in that video I mentioned that I was going to make another video about the forest ecology. So this is a video about the forest ecology. This forest ecology is really interesting, and it's pretty common in this area. It could use a lot of nurturing. It's kind of out of balance. So I'm just gonna go move the video to the end so we can look at this map here. The video that is shot in the woods was taken right here, I believe. And we're looking across the creek over on this slope here. And these contour lines, if I remember right, are 10 meters apart. So that's what? That's like 35 to 40 feet, somewhere in that neighborhood. So this is fairly steep for our landscape. And there's this big field up here on the ridgetop with all these drainages that go off. And these drainages are highly eroded, and there's lots of gullies, and they make big gullies when they get to the bottom of the hill. This is the bottom land. And there's a bunch of these upland field gullies draining into this one. And so this gully here is probably 50 plus feet wide and over 30 feet deep for sure in areas. Right here, it's probably 30 to 50 feet wide. Anyway, these gullies are big, and they're a big problem on this farm that we're trying to work on. But yeah, so back to this big field here, this big ridge, this big landscape ridgetop. There's a large creek on this side over here off the map. 1 or 2 farms over, there's a really large valley, and so there's a lot of loess soil that's getting blown out of that valley up onto this ridgetop. And so this ridgetop is really productive soil. It's deep loess. And then on the back side of the ridgetop, the loess accumulates. So this is really deep loess accumulation. Here we've got this wind exposed area. So the winds are predominantly from the southwest, so it's coming up here and hitting this. So the loess might be thin right here, but it's going to be really deep right here. Because the loess lands on the landscape similar to a snowdrift. And so places that get wind, a lot of wind, are going to have really thin loess deposits. And then places where the winds settle, the soil drops out of the wind and we get thicker loess deposits. So the area where the video is an area where the loess is pretty deep. And you can see we've got a lot of these areas on this landscape. I like this micro variability. And then we've got all this upland too. Usually these uplands are cleared, and this was actually semi-old growth white oak. It had been logged probably 20 years ago. I can't clearly recall right now. But there was a lot of big white oak. Most of them aren't that great a quality because they are the leftovers that the loggers left a long time ago. We can see this dead tree here. So this is one of the OG trees. It's one of the older trees, and it was mature and it died. and we don't know why it died. But it was left whenever they logged all the other trees out that were growing around it. There are no big trees around it. They were all logged out a long time ago. This one was left for obvious reasons. Not going to get a nice piece of lumber out of that one. And so that's kind of the legacy. It looks like there could be another bigger one up here, and it looks like it definitely has some defect too. And this is really common. Most of the bigger diameter trees that I see in Missouri's woodlands and forest are low quality trees that the loggers left. And then what else do we notice about the trees? There's a lot of little ones, right? I guess there's not that many. This one's probably 6 inches diameter. This one's probably 4 inches. Another 4-inch. This one could be 8 inches. These are all sugar maple. And then below the sugar maple, there's nothing. This video was taken at the end of May. So we're at the end of the spring ephemeral wildflower season. And there's nothing growing down here. We look over here and we've got this patch of green. So we've got this little patch right here where some stuff is growing. But it's a very small patch, and there's something different going on there. And I think it's history, being that the lake was here. Maybe this area was flooded previously. Here's an ash tree, a white ash. They all died last year in the state. Here's more sugar maple. Here's a red oak. Here's a sugar maple that's like 8 to 10 inches. This is a white oak. Just go back here a little bit. I wasn't filming the trees, I was filming the goalie in this video, so all the trees are gonna kind of be on the periphery. Here's a sprout cluster. It looks like 2 or 3 red oak stems, large diameter. This one looks like it's probably 20 inches around. Can't really say about the one behind it, but it's probably similar. They sprouted together whenever there was a red oak here that previously that was cut, probably in a timber sale. And these are the sprouts that came off of it. So we can age this tree, count the rings, and determine how long ago a timber sale happened for this tree anyway. Looks like we've got another little white oak right here. And again, we've got these scattered sugar maple with nothing growing in the understory. There is zero vegetation. So, ecologically speaking, this is a little bit of a wildlife desert. There's not much here for wildlife. There's not much reason to visit. In the winter, when this red oak cluster and these little white oak trees and the bigger mature white oak trees, when they drop their acorns in the fall, there'll be animals coming through, passing through, that are digging up acorns under the leaf litter. But for the rest of the year, it's kind of, how much useful is this for wildlife? The songbirds are visiting the tree canopies, picking off insects on the leaves and in the bark. But on the soil, on the ground, if you're a small mammal, there's no cover for you to feel safe while you're visiting the area. If you're raising young, there's no place to really hide your young. A predator can stand right here and scan this entire area, figure out where the good hiding places are pretty quickly, go visit those places in a very short time and then be on to the next one. So this isn't really a great place for wildlife. Ecologically speaking, there's not a lot of diversity. There's not a lot of abundance of plants. And there's very low density. If we look up here towards the field edge, which starts pretty close, it doesn't go very far, the timber. It gets more brushy along the field edge where there's more light. And if I remember right, there was bush honeysuckle is one of those members of that brushiness. So, yeah, this is fairly common on these higher quality Loess soils where we have an oak overstory that's been logged enough, and there's not very many nice ones growing in the overstory. There's a few scattered around, but even those, this one here looks like it was a double and it might have died, and so there could be some rot, some hollowness, some decay that has climbed up this log as a result of this wound right here when this tree died. That's pretty common. We've got another big double red oak right here, maybe a triple. Looks like I can definitely see two. This one looks like a red oak as well, and this one looks like it's big with some maybe some butt log issues. I don't know, that might be a white oak. It's a little difficult to say. Looks like a big red oak down here. And then we've got all this open space. So I'll just move this video around to another part. It's pretty much more of the same. And these sugar maple, let me try to get to where it's not blurred. Yeah, there's a bigger sugar maple there. That one's probably 14, 16, maybe even 18 inches diameter. I was gonna say, these small ones, even this little one right here can be 70 years old. They can live to be 400 years old, and they just hang out in the shade waiting for an opening in the overstory. And while they're waiting in the shade, a lot of them are dying. You know, this one is struggling compared to this one, which has gotten more growth on it. It's more competitive. It's probably found its way to sneak into the overstory a little bit to where it's getting a little sunlight. And this one for sure is in the overstory. And it's unfortunate I don't have the video of the overstory here to look at the treetops, but I'll make another video that shows how to look at treetops. But these trees have been here for a while. And so what's going on here? This is a pretty common story across Missouri, and it was first documented in the scientific literature probably in the 50s in the Missouri River Hills region from St. Louis to Columbia of sugar maple encroachment in our oak hickory forest. These Loess soils are very common along rivers, including the Missouri River and major creek valleys. And they grow pretty big trees. And they're really fertile. And without fire, they slowly transition into maple forest. And here's a perfect example. We don't see any small oak trees. I'll go back because I started to say it earlier and I stopped. But these small white oak trees on this property, when I was out doing the survey, every single white oak tree that was 12 inches or under had serious decay inside the butt log. And that's because these trees were suppressed by the larger overstory trees that were cut. These trees were growing in the understory or the midstory, and they had what we call flat tops. And so when this tree was cut, this one got released and it grew up and became an overstory tree. But it had chronic health issues at the time. At the time that this one was cut, it had chronic health issues because it was shaded out in the midstory and understory. It was barely growing, hanging on, trying to survive. And then when this tree was cut, it got relief and started growing more, but it never recovered from the chronic health issues. And it, to this day, it continues to have rot. That is every white oak tree on this property that's under 12 inches tall. And that's because of past management. That's because of how it was managed in the timber sale. And there was no thinning, there was no cleaning up and selecting of the good trees before or after the timber sale. This could have been corrected so that at least some of these trees would be good quality today, but it wasn't at the time. And so unfortunately there's not a lot of small oak trees to pick from that you really want to grow into the overstory. And in their place, there's a lot of sugar maple. So the sugar maple is really sensitive to fire. And when these woods burned often, sugar maple was not a component in these woods. It would have been found further down slope by the creek or by the river, but not up here on top of the slope. The lack of fire has allowed the sugar maple to dominate the understory because it's tolerant of shade. The oaks are not tolerant of shade. In fact, oaks cultivate fire, and I'm thinking that they cultivate fire as a way to control competition, because the oaks have thick bark that can tolerate fire to a degree, of course. A really hot fire, they can't tolerate a really hot fire. But if we're having a somewhat mild intensity fire, the oaks aren't going to experience much stress, if any at all. Whereas the sugar maple tend to experience some stress, especially the young sugar maple. The oak seedlings, they're fire adapted because they can top die and sprout back from the roots. Because in their first years, when that acorn germinates, it's putting a lot of root down. So that when fire comes, because it knows it's going to come, when the fire comes and kills the top, it just sprouts back from the root. And then when there's a year where it's so wet that there are no fires, it gets enough growth to get big enough to survive fire. And of course, it's a game of numbers. There's a lot more that die than actually make it to the overstory. And so oaks, they can die with fire, but it's a game of numbers again. With management, we have ways to work around that. We can have some fire-free years built into our restoration program to allow oak seedlings to grow up. And then once they become fire tolerant, we can reintroduce fire back into the site. But oaks used to be way more common on this site, and maple was not common at all. And now we have a lot of maple and not a lot of oaks. This stand is really stagnant as far as growth. There's a couple telltale signs. One is the size distribution of the maple. If we go back to this larger maple here, so we've got little maple and we've got big maple. So this stand has not had light down here for a long time in order for this maple to be here. If there hasn't been a lot of light, that means the canopy's been closed for a long time, putting a lot of darkness, a lot of shade, and a lot of stress on any plants that are trying to live in the shade, hence all these smaller white oak trees. It's complex why they're all hollow. It's not just because they were once growing in the understory and midstory and then released, but that's a big part of the story. Another part of the story is because there's so much competition that there's really limited resources, and all these trees have diminished health. And in some places on the property, I saw where all the trees have chronic health issues. And that's because of stagnation. That's because there's not frequent enough disturbance to thin the trees out enough to allow a continuous high productivity growth rate. Another way we can tell that it's stagnant is by all the dead logs on the ground. In ecological speak, we call this coarse woody debris, or we abbreviate it as CWD. And there's not a lot on the ground here, but there's a good amount. And because we can see everything, we can see where it's all laying and we can see how much there is. A lot of it is mid-story size stuff. There's an occasional overstory tree, as we see right here. But a lot of it is mid-story stuff or smaller overstory stuff. And it's just growing in the shade of these bigger trees, and they can't keep up. And they hang on for decades sometimes before they perish, and then they die. Here's that white ash, and all the white ash have died now. I saw a couple this growing season, 2025, that were partially alive. Less than 30% of the canopy had leaves in it. They definitely looked like they were dying. Every single other ash tree that I saw was dead in the 2025 growing season. And I saw quite a few, and I visited properties all over the state. It's pretty consistent statewide. So that's going to be a log on the ground. They are falling apart pretty quickly. They don't have a dense wood, and these big ash trees, by the end of the 2025 growing season, we're already seeing large branches on the ground. This isn't from that ash tree, but we're seeing large branches on the ground already, and probably by next summer we're going to see a lot of the tops are just completely broken off of them after a few high wind storms. It's really good to have coarse woody debris on the ground. It's a really necessary component. This one log right here, I don't see very many around here. It looks like there could be an equal sized one here. There's maybe one or two others in this entire valley. And these invite life. So there's going to be maybe a deer fawn bedded right here. Maybe a fox is going to raise young right here. Maybe a bear is going to take a nap. Maybe a bat is going to sleep here. There's going to be some frogs, some salamanders. there's going to be unique bacteria and fungus associated with this that cannot be found where the log is not found. So you're only going to find certain species where the log is located. And you can imagine if we had more of these and we had more of those species in here, you would start to see these exponential increases in the effects that would radiate out from that. So this one log makes a huge difference. Whenever I do controlled burning, I prefer to come out here with the leaf blower and blow around this with the leaf blower before we burn so that we can preserve this and not lose it. The other method is to burn within a couple days of a rain event so that this log still has moisture in it, but we've had enough wind to dry these leaves out. So then the log has moisture, it doesn't burn up, but the leaves do get burnt up, at least the top layer of leaves, which is ideal. And so I don't like to do dry burns, hot burns, for another reason, because I don't like to lose these logs on the ground. You can see we don't have very many, so it's really high value. Let's see what else is going on in here. We're not seeing a lot of tree seedlings. This looks like it could be either a wild lettuce or an ash. And being underneath this ash tree, it could be an ash, very likely. Not that much. Don't see a lot of sedges, grasses, wildflowers. Where's all the shrubs? Looks like there's some tree seedlings in here. Maybe some grape. Maybe some Virginia creeper. Sugar maple seedlings. More white ash. Down here it looks like it could be a little bit of shrubbery along with some ground vegetation associated with the wetland. That pond, the dam on it's broken and it doesn't hold water, but it does stay, the soil stays moist. Okay. Again, looks like there's a few tree seedlings sprinkled around. A lot of these look like they could be maple, ash, hickory, Virginia creeper. So ideally what we'd want to do is we'd want to reintroduce fire. We can see we have a bench up here, a table, and then the slope increases and it drops off. And I talked about all this in the hydrology video. But when we burn, it's going to burn a little more high intensity up here. And then as it starts to go down the slope, it's going to burn at a lower intensity. And it might put itself out when it gets down here because maybe the soils are still moist down here. And it's keeping the leaf litter more wet. And it's not as windy down here. It's kind of protected from the wind, so the winds aren't drying the leaves out as much. So maybe this area down here doesn't burn at all. This area here kind of burns, but some of these areas may not burn. And then this area up here, all of it burns. This is what we call matrix, and it's really desirable. And we can get this when we do mild intensity burning to where it doesn't burn every single area. That's great. That creates a diversity. Now, in the next growing season, this area is going to be different than this area maybe, and different than this area. We start to create all this different complexity and nuance in such a short area across the landscape. That's really good for wildlife. It's really good for ecosystem health, ecosystem resilience. So that when we have a drought, this entire area is more green, more resilient, less vulnerable to insect and disease. But I like that mild intensity burning because it creates that matrix. That's another reason that I like the mild intensity burning. And, maybe 1 out of every 5 burns, we can burn a little warmer and go ahead and make sure that this bottomland gets burned. Or we can come back on a dry day. After we've already burned all this and it's all black, we can come back on a day that is a little drier and burn this out, or parts of it out. Because this has all been burned already, we don't have to worry about the fire escaping. This is all one big fire line, basically. And so we can burn this out and get this burned out. But we're going to want to have it not burn in some cases to create that complexity. Now, once we start burning, we're going to want to burn every year in the restoration phase, in the beginning years of burning. Reintroduce fire. Our first one's going to be a mild burn, and it's just going to creep down the hills, and it's going to put itself out in places, and we're not going to notice much difference, except there's going to be more growth down here in the understory. There's going to be more of this green stuff, much more. We won't be able to see the bare leaf litter. It'll be covered after one burn. And then we wait a year, we have a rest year with no burning, and then we do another burn. And we notice that the green is more dense and maybe a little more tall now after the second burn. And we might notice some of these suppressed, stagnant, chronically unhealthy trees. They might be stressed out by 2 mild fires, and you might start to see them get more stressed and look more unhealthy, and you might even see some mortality in those after 2 burns. Then you take a rest year and you do a third burn, and you're definitely going to start to see mortality in these trees, some of them anyway, that are suppressed and chronically unhealthy. And you're definitely going to see a lot more vegetation growing in the understory, and you're going to see a lot of oak acorns. I said earlier that the oaks cultivate fire. Well, their leaves are highly flammable. And so every year they're dropping this layer of highly flammable leaves, and then it burns off and kills the sugar maple and the hackberry and some of the hickory and some other species that aren't tolerant of fire like the oak is. So we start to see the sugar maple go away, especially the suppressed ones. We might see some of these unhealthy oaks go away, especially if they have holes at the bottom where fire can get inside and they become a chimney. Again, I try to preserve these trees by identifying them before the fire, put a fire line around it so it doesn't burn, because I like to have standing hollow trees for the wildlife. It doesn't have a big canopy. It's not a big competitor tree. In some cases, I might want to take these trees out, though, so it's on a case-by-case basis. But generally, I like to preserve hollow trees. Okay, then we do a rest year and we do a 4th burn, and after the 4th burn, we might start to see one of the bigger sugar maple trees die. But the bigger sugar maple tend to be fire tolerant because they have thicker bark. We're definitely going to see the smaller sugar maple disappearing, and we're not going to be seeing any sugar maple in the seedling layer. They cannot regenerate with fire. The seedlings cannot tolerate fire like the oaks can. So that's kind of the ecology of this degraded woodland that has had fire excluded for decades, if not a century. It used to be an oak forest. Most of the oaks were logged out. The fire was excluded. Now there's a few large oaks in the overstory, and there's a few smaller oaks in the overstory, and all of those are of low quality for the most part. And then they are surrounded by younger sugar maple that are just waiting patiently to take their place. Below the sugar maple, there's nothing. Absolutely nothing. With fire, we can change this. It's pretty simple to do. After we've done burning, after we've done 4 burns and we've restored fire, then is a good time to come in and start taking out some trees that the fire didn't take out. So this big maple here might survive fire, and we just come in with a chainsaw and take it out after we've had several burns. At that point, we should have a bunch of oak seedlings down here, so that when we take this maple out and there's now light on the forest floor, the oak seedlings are ready to go. So within 10 years, we can really regenerate this site and restore it ecologically. And after 10 years, give or take a few, depends on the results of all the burning. We never know. We can back off on the burning and not be so intense. You can be more intense if you want it to be more open. You can be less intense if you want it to stay a closed woodland. And everything in between, just by changing the burn frequency and burn intensity. This is a high quality, has a potential to be a growing high quality white oak, and so my preference would be to maintain this as a closed white oak woodland, with of course some other species like red oak, and I would preserve some of the sugar maple, but I would get them more into balance and try to have all of this filled in with oak trees, and then maybe a few hickory, maybe a basswood, shellbark hickory, maybe a bur oak. We can mix it up. And I would continue growing nice, high quality logs on this site, but I would use mild intensity burning that's not going to harm the nice quality logs to increase the ecological quality and value of this woodland, and also to sustain oaks into the future. If fire is not reintroduced in 50 years, well, many of these big oak trees will be dead and gone, and the sugar maple will replace them. And so this will slowly transition to a non-oak sugar maple forest if nothing is done. And if the landowner was to have a timber sale again, let's say that all these were nice trees, all these big oak trees are nice, the landowner wanted to have a timber sale, they would be releasing all these sugar maple. So if you're going to do a timber sale, it's good to start doing this ecological work 10 years before the timber sale. It's never too late to get started. These trees grow slow. They're going to be around for a long time. Any work that we do right now is going to be noticeable in the future. So if you do burn this, let's say you burn it 4 times in 10 years, in 50 to 100 years, a knowledgeable ecologist is going to be able to walk into this stand and be like, something different happened here. And they might be a good detective and be able to figure out what happened. But it will be noticeable. So we can make a difference. And this is not a good time to have a timber sale. You do not want to turn this into a sugar maple stand. It's best to preserve the oak, to preserve for the future generations that are going to be living here, so that they have some oak available for themselves. And for all the wildlife that depend on the acorns. The acorns are what provide a considerable amount of food going into winter and through the winter. The winter is the starving period for a lot of wildlife. A lot of wildlife gets sick and don't make it through the winter. And acorns can make a huge difference. Whenever we have what we call bumper crop years, where all the oak trees produce a lot of acorns, happens every 7 years or off. So whenever we have these bumper crop years and there's an abundance of acorns, we have higher survival in the wildlife. And vice versa, whenever there's not a lot of acorns, there's noticeable increased wildlife mortality. So if we transition from an oak forest to a maple forest, in this case, we're going to see different wildlife using it for different reasons, using the landscape for different reasons. And I'm not for sure if that's good or not. I've been asking that question a lot, and I've ran into a few avian biologists who appreciate the sugar maple for the bugs that they provide on the leaves for the birds to forage on. But I'm pretty sure oaks provide that as well, so I think it's debatable. I'm not sure if anybody knows what is better. But if we look at ecological restoration, this site was historically oak, and it's an easy justification to restore fire, restore those ancient land management practices, and restore the oak. And so this landowner got a forest management plan, and this video was taken while I was doing the plan. And now they're in the process of going and getting started on the restoration process and getting fire out here. All right, that's all I got for this video. I rambled on quite a bit. I hope you understand there's a playback speed choice, and you can speed this up. But really appreciate you watching. If you got any questions, feel free to drop a comment or send me a private message. Appreciate you watching. See you later.
Trees, oh trees, do you remember me? Trees, oh trees, do you remember me? From before all my songs.